Welcome this evening. Hi, I'm Lauren Rosenkrantz. I'm a career coach that specializes in working with college students, recent grads, young professionals, and I'm so happy to be here as part of the Norwalk Public Library's job search series. And this is part two, and we'll cover today resume and cover letter writing. And what's unique about today's session is that those that are attending this session will also have an opportunity to submit their resume for a critique and feedback. So you'll have the tools after today's session, and then you're welcome to email your resume to me, and I'd be happy to give you some feedback. So we can talk more about that and answer your questions. I'll take a break about midway in and at the end to answer questions. So, but if at any time you have trouble hearing me or seeing the slides, please unmute yourself or put something in the chat and we'll respond right away. So let's get started. As I said, today we're covering resume and cover letter writing. And, I want to start by saying that producing a good resume and a well-written cover letter is a basic requirement for any successful job search. So I'm happy that we're covering this content today. These documents play a really important role in helping employers understand who you are, what motivates you, as well as what you have to offer as a potential employee. So we'll really break it down, the components of a resume, as well as what to include in a cover letter. And I will say before, at the start of any job search process, it's really important to think about who you are. So some tools to do that would be some self-assessments that are available through many college career centers or online. At Career One Stop, you can find some good self-assessments, but it's really important to take some time to think about not only who you are and what you want, but what are your skills? What are your interests? How will your values play a role in your job search? So it's important to do this for a number of reasons. You want to make sure that when you do target employers, that these employers and these opportunities will be a good fit for you. So the more you know about yourself, the better able you will be able to find this good fit. So something to think about when you're preparing these documents, the resume and the cover letter, is that they're part of you and your personal brand. So let's talk about branding for a moment. Every company or corporation has a reputation that you think of when you hear their name. So if you hear, about the company Nike, you might think of the swoosh or Just Do It, or you think it's very similar with a personal brand. So a personal brand is who you are, what you stand for, and the values that you want to convey. So as a company brand might help communicate its value to its customers and help that company stand out amongst its competition. A personal brand does the same for individuals. It can help you communicate your unique identity as well as your value to potential employers. So for some people, it's really hard for them to define what they're naturally good at or, to analyze themselves. So one other way, if self-assessments aren't for you, these little online quizzes that sort of help you define your interests and skills and values, you can ask friends or relatives for their help in figuring this out. Have them describe your best qualities or your greatest achievements. And that can help you define your personal brand as well. Once you know what your core strengths or skills are and your goals, it's then important to think about who your target audience is. What companies are you going to target in your job search? And then once you've figured out which companies you're going to be interested in applying jobs, where you're going to be interested in applying for jobs. it's important then to dig a little deeper and figure out what their needs are. So what problems do they need to have solved? How can you help them? What are their hiring managers looking for in a candidate? So one way to do that is to look at their job postings. You can of course look on their LinkedIn page. You can look on their company website, and then you can also dig deeper into their job postings. What skills or keywords are they including in their job postings? And that'll give you a sense of their needs. And as companies develop their marketing materials, you are developing materials to help market yourself. So this would include a cover letter, a resume, a LinkedIn profile, and you want to try to be consistent across all of these different platforms. And of course, have a professional image. And we'll talk more about that in our fourth part of our job search series in a couple weeks. So before writing your resume and cover letter, you're going to do some research, as we just talked about. So you can research the company on their website. You research by looking at their job postings and the details of the position you're interested in applying for. You're going to read this job description or posting very carefully and thoroughly. I encourage you to highlight it or, underline or read it at least twice to really get a sense of what keywords or skills are necessary for the position. And it doesn't mean you have to have all of the skills. Maybe you have, most of the skills, 60 to 70% of the skills, because sometimes companies will be willing to train you on the skills that you don't have if you meet the other requirements of the position. And if I can convey one thing to all of you that's sort of most important and that really helps you as a job seeker stand out, is that you're going to take the time to customize your resume for each position you apply for. It is critical in your job search that your resume does not seem generic, meaning, that you're going to take the time to pull out those keywords and skills in the job posting, and they're going to appear on your resume for that particular job. So we'll talk more about each section of your resume, and you'll get a sense of what I mean. So as you're getting started, just some rules or tips to keep in mind. At this stage in your career, most resumes will be one page. And it's important to know that most recruiters or hiring managers are taking, 20, 30 seconds to look at your resume, sometimes even less. So it's important that you make a positive impression. And if you have, critical information that's on page 2, it's possible that the recruiter may never get there. So for college students, recent grads, young professionals, I recommend a one-page resume. On the resume, you're going to avoid any personal pronouns like she or he or you. When you start to write your bullet points, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, you're going to start each one with an action verb. And there are plenty of lists online or on your Career Center pages that give you lists of action verbs for you to choose from. So that's easy to identify these action verbs to use in your resumes. You're going to use a common font throughout your resume so it's not distracting. And your font size should be 10 point or 12 point. Equal margins, at least a ½ inch. You wouldn't want anything to be cut off to a 1 inch maximum margin around the page. You're going to use a layout of bullet points rather than paragraphs, because paragraphs are challenging for the reader to look through quickly, and bullet points just make it that much easier. And of course, with any of your marketing materials, you're going to want to proofread them for any spelling or grammatical errors. And of course, you can have, I'd be happy to look at your resume and look for any errors as well. But you can, sometimes have a trusted friend or a family member check to see if there are any errors on your resume before you send it out. So let's go over the different sections that you know, I would suggest including on your resume. The first is the contact information section. So that's at the top of the page. Sometimes it's in a larger font. Sometimes people bold their name. I would say nowadays an address is optional. So if you choose not to include your address, that is okay. But your name needs to be clear, you know, on your resume, your cell phone number, your email address. If you're a college student, it's great to use the college email address. If you're using a personal email address, it needs to be something, you know, very similar to your first and last name rather than a nickname or something that's, you know, humorous. You really want to keep the email address on a resume, you know, really consistent with your brand, and not something that's sort of something you might have used years ago. And as we talked about last week, you can include your LinkedIn URL. So that's something that would be great at the top of your resume as well. This next section, the objective section, I really think is optional. So if you don't have something really specific to convey that highlights exactly what that position or the company is looking for, you can omit it. So, you know, those that are sort of generic, like looking for customer service opportunity, I would say, you know, leave it off. It really needs to be customized and specific if you're going to include it. And again, that's really optional. So for college students, your most recent experience is in college. And so I recommend that you put your education section next. If you've been out of college a few years and you have some more full-time work experience, you can switch those sections and bring work experience up to the top. But for college students and recent grads, education is most recent, so that comes next. And there you're going to include your name of the college or university, the city and state where they're located, and then graduation year. Under the education section, you can also, if you're a freshman or a sophomore in college, you can include your high school information as well. So I would say by the end of sophomore year, as a rule of thumb, is when you would take the high school content off your resume. If you have relevant coursework that directly applies to the position that you're seeking, you can include that under your education section as well. So you would list relevant coursework and then the names of the courses you took, again, that directly apply. And then you can also include either under the education section or in a separate section right below some honors and awards. And here, I would say a general rule of thumb is to include your GPA if it's a 3.0 or above. Next on your resume could be a skills section. You can include it here next, or you can include it towards the bottom if your experience more closely relates to the position you've applied for. So here you have a little flexibility. But in terms of the skills section, on a resume, you're only going to include hard skills. So I've seen many college student resumes where they try to put in communication skills or presentation skills, problem solving skills. Those are considered to be soft skills, and there'll be a place for those in your cover letter. But for a resume, you want to stick to facts. And so a hard skill in terms of your language proficiency, your computer skills, that's what you're going to include in your skills section. Next, in your experience section, I encourage you to include any paid experience, part-time experience, internship, volunteer positions that you've held are fine too. Or if you have extensive volunteer experience, you can have that in a separate section. In all cases, though, you're going to list in reverse chronological order, which just means that you're going to list the most recent position first. So if you're currently working at CVS would come before, if you had previous work experience at Target, let's say. Just mentioning a couple of retailers there, but you want to make sure that in every section you're listing everything in reverse chronological order. Same with the activities and interests section. That's another optional section. If you have leadership experience that's relevant to the job that you're seeking, then you'll include it there. References is not something you'll include on your resume, but you can always have it typed out on a separate sheet of paper for any employer that asks. Sometimes they'll also ask for you to include references on the job application itself. So why don't I take a moment here to see if anyone has questions before I dive into our next slide. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so one of the most critical parts of writing your resume is really explaining the job experience that you've had. And so what I'm going to encourage, not only are you going to start each bullet point statement with an action verb, but for every one of your experiences, I'm going to encourage you not to just state the responsibilities that you had, but really think about what you did, how you did it. So what skills did you use? What was important to the position? And what was the end result or the accomplishment? So when you're including bullet point statements, you can really customize them depending on the job that you're applying for. But you can also have, bullet point statements, that sort of are relevant to, each job that you're applying for. Because if you include significant accomplishments, you can probably customize that so it's relevant for any position you're seeking. So I would encourage you to think about when you were in this job, what problem you faced, the action that you took, and the results that you achieved. So that's another way of saying what you did, how you did it, and why you did it. You want to make sure you're going to tell the full story, including the value you added. And sometimes citing numbers can be really helpful in conveying what you did and how you did it and what the end result was. And you'll see that in some of the sample bullet point statements on the next slide. So a couple of examples that I'll read to you, that include some numbers. So it really gives you a sense of what the person did in the role. So for example, coordinated weekly activities for 60+ children ages 5 to 10 in a safe and caring environment while reinforcing rules and procedures. So that could be applicable to a camp counselor job. That's a great bullet point statement that starts with the action verb, includes, you really get a sense, wow, 60+ children, that's a lot of kids under that person's responsibility. And so it gives the reader or the employer a real sense of what the responsibility was and the action took. In the next example, increase monthly sales by 20% through collaboration with coworkers and supervisors on new marketing campaign to better reach target audience. So again, increase is certainly a positive action verb. You find out how much sales were increased by the person's work, so 20%. And you understand what the end result was, that this marketing campaign was better able to reach the company's target audience. So those are some examples. And again, we will send the slides to anyone attending this this presentation so that you will have them to refer to when you're creating your bullet point statements. And sometimes I also recommend to job seekers that if you've had a job, sometimes I will Google, if I were, let's say, an administrative assistant, I might Google administrative assistant job description or administrative assistant resume, and I get some samples or some ideas. I would never copy word for word, but it sort of gives me a sense of how other people have described those jobs and the tasks associated with those jobs. So I'll take a moment again to see if anyone has any questions before diving into tips for creating your cover letter. Okay. So a cover letter is an introduction to your resume. It usually accompanies a resume, and sometimes now job seekers avoid writing a cover letter, but I can tell you it can make a real difference in getting your resume looked at and getting the opportunity to interview with an employer. It's an opportunity for you to tie your experience directly to the job description. It allows the employer to see what your qualifications are based on their job needs. So you can really sell your skills in a cover letter. It's generally speaking 3 to 4 paragraphs. Again, like with a resume being 1 page, if you make your cover letter too long, you might lose the interest of the reader. You're always going to check for grammar and spelling errors when you're producing any of your marketing materials. And our last bullet point, I really encourage you to figure out, you can go online and do some searching, who the recruiter or the hiring manager is, rather than address the cover letter to whom it may concern. So do a little digging, see if you can figure out, a first and last name, and address it to that person if possible. If you cannot, then I would say dear hiring manager would be your best bet. Okay, so when you're writing this cover letter, I have a sample here for you. You're going to include, just as you do on your resume, your street address, city, state, and zip code, so that the employer knows where to contact you, the date, the name of the person, who is the hiring manager, their title, if you have it, the company and the organization, their street address, city, state, and zip code. You're really going to include this as a PDF document attached to an email, or you submit it as a PDF document like you do a resume when you're applying for a job online. And again, whenever possible, you're going to direct it to an individual. So dear Mr., Ms., or Doctor, and their name. And your first paragraph is going to state the position you're applying for and where you learned about the opportunity. So if you were referred by an employee, a current employee of that organization, you were referred by a friend or a family member, you're going to really want to use their name right there in the first sentence of the first paragraph. And then you're just going to briefly introduce yourself. The second and the third paragraph gives the reader, the hiring manager, a chance to know why you're interested in the position or the organization or in that field of work, and what your qualifications are. You're going to highlight 2 or 3 achievements using specific examples. And you can take these examples from your academic coursework, from any paid or unpaid work experience that you've had, And you want to, of course, relate it to the position and field that you're applying for. And you want to make it very easy for that hiring manager to see how you would be a good fit for their organization. In your final paragraph, you're going to summarize your interests and qualifications and then restate your enthusiasm for the position. You're going to thank the employer for their consideration and include your contact information, including a phone number or email address where you can be reached. And then you're going to, in closing, use a sincerely or a best regards or, thank or a thank you and your name, and then indicate if there's an enclosure or an attachment like your resume. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and see if we have any questions. No questions today? Okay. Any questions? I know we have a little more time. Any questions from last week's presentation on LinkedIn? All right. Well, Vicki, Lori, is there anything you'd like me to add? Okay, I see another.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in the chat though.
Okay, great. So Audrey asked, if you're planning to attend a master's program that's relevant to the position you're applying for, would you include that in the cover letter? I would say you would include it in the cover letter if, when you say you're planning to attend, I would say once you've been accepted into a master's program. I don't know if you'd want to call attention to it in a resume unless in a cover letter, unless it was, and unless you've been accepted. Because if you weren't accepted into the program and then it comes up in the interview, it might be awkward to explain, well, I applied, but I wasn't accepted into the master's program. Then you wouldn't have wanted to sort of introduce that topic, in the cover letter. So I would wait until you're accepted and then indicate that you're pursuing it. But by all means, if it's something that's of interest to you in terms of in the future, you plan on pursuing a master's degree and you speak about it more generally, I would say that that's okay. As long as you don't make promises that, you don't indicate that you've been accepted when you haven't. So you can certainly say, I hope to pursue a master's in, business or psychology or whatever it is one day, if you think that that will help your candidacy. But I would also, try to stick to what, accomplishments, achievements, experiences that you've had, coursework that you've had that you can point to. Does that answer the question, Audrey? Yes, okay, terrific. Vicki, I don't think I'm seeing other questions in the chat. Did I miss something?
No, sorry. I was just trying to hurry up and say it. So
that's okay. Okay. So in terms of, the group that's with us, I'm curious, have you put together a resume before, and was it a process that was, that you've gotten some help with in the past, or have you had some feedback on your resume in the past? Is there anything that you're sort of looking for from me that I can specifically help you with your resume or cover letter?
You know, Lauren, just to reiterate your point, I think that one-page resume is a really important point, that conciseness is always the best policy. A lot of jobs, especially nowadays, they're getting, oh, I'm sorry, my camera's off. They're getting, you know, 50, 100 resumes for an application. And you want yourself to stand out right from the beginning, and to ask somebody to, you know, look through a 3-page resume, I think is a lot to ask about prospective employees. So I think that's a really important point.
Thank you, Lori. I would agree. And you know what I didn't mention that certainly applies is many resumes are being read by applicant tracking systems. So, you know, what I shared in terms of including keywords and skills that mirror the job description, that's especially true for when your resume is being tracked or captured by an applicant tracking system. They're really looking for you to mirror that job description in terms of what skills and experiences you've had, and using those keywords will alert the system that you're a better match.
And that applicant tracking system is actually software. It's not a person, correct?
Yes, it's software. It's software. So they're not going to look at nuance. They're going to look at, you know, what's the data that you've included you know, on your resume. And, you know, they're going to, it's a system, it's a computer system, exactly, a software system that's doing the work for the hiring manager. So they're doing some of the screening before a hiring manager might even have an opportunity to see your resume.
Yeah, and I think that there's one other question in the chat, but just to follow up with the formatting, I think it's important to point out the 10, 12 point font. You know, ooching it out to 9.5 and having a prospective employer having to, you know, what does that really say? You never want them to struggle to read it. That is just, yeah. Okay, this question is, what's the etiquette on following up with a potential employer following submitting a cover letter resume?
I would say that you can definitely follow up within a couple weeks of submitting a resume and cover letter, but you might not actually hear back because right now, actually for the past, you know, few years, companies are inundated with resumes and applicants. And they don't always have a turnaround time of, you know, and the ability to respond, even though it's courteous and even though they should respond to each applicant to let you know where you stand in their process, they don't always do it. But in terms of etiquette, you can certainly express your interest in the opportunity by following up by email to let them know that you are interested in the opportunity. And here you'd want to keep it brief in terms of, you know, that you submitted your resume or application for this opportunity, and that you're, you know, you're eager to hear if you can be considered or if they need additional information, and you can express your interest that way. I would say though, what I'm hearing from job seekers is that they're not necessarily hearing back from every job they apply for. But, you know, if you want to try to confirm that your resume was received, you can certainly try to do that. Everything you're going to convey in an email, you know, is going to be very positive. So even if it's been a long time and you haven't heard back, you know, but you have the idea that the job is still open, you know, you want to convey enthusiasm rather than, you know, sort of dismay at their practice of not responding. So everything about your marketing materials should convey enthusiasm, professionalism, and an eagerness to join their team.
Do you have any tips and tricks to make it visually stand out? Do you suggest that, you know, your name at the top be in bigger font or in a color font? Or do you ever suggest putting a picture of yourself, you know, a little profile picture in the corner or anything like that?
So good questions, Lori. So with regard to font, you can certainly enlarge the font for your name. I usually, unless you are a graphic designer or an artist, I would, and there are certainly templates for resumes that are less traditional. If you are a creative, if you're pursuing a creative opportunity. But other than that, I would stick to some more traditional fonts, stick to, removing color, because sometimes color isn't able to be read as well as sort of a standard black font. So that's what I would include. In terms of photo, I think employers really, I would say that job seekers should shy away from including any kind of photo with their resume. What's fabulous about LinkedIn is that it gives employers a chance to see you. And so what I would suggest, instead of including a photo on your resume or any personal data for that matter. So you wouldn't want to include, I know sometimes, CVs and international applicants might include information about their health or about their marital status or, sort of height and weight. So all of that is to be avoided on a resume. And if an employer needs that information because it's required for the job, then they'll find a way to legally ask you that information. But it's something you'd want to leave off the resume. And your photo, when you're focused on including a photo, would be have your LinkedIn photo be a great headshot, professional looking image of you.
And finally, I'm just going to keep going, and please, everyone, jump into the chat if anything comes up. I think one of the big mistakes I sometimes see is people sending resumes as Word documents, and I think that considering that we're not all using Office anymore, what do you suggest what file format do you suggest? And you suggest that your cover letter and your resume be sent as one file? And finally, do you suggest that we name the file something specific?
Okay, great. Lori, thank you so much. So let's make sure I cover all of those questions. So first is in terms of it, you attaching your resume and cover letter, you need to attach them as PDFs, because when you attach a resume as a Word doc, sometimes as you said, the person on the receiving end doesn't see it the way you intended or can't open it. And a PDF allows them to see it the way you intended it, meaning your formatting remains consistent. So sometimes when I've had resumes emailed to me as a Word doc, all of a sudden something happened with the margins and the spacing and something's off. So a PDF will solve that issue. I would encourage you to save your resume and your cover letter as separate docs, as separate PDFs rather, sorry, so separate. And I would encourage you to name them with your first and last name. So you could say, Lauren Rosenkrantz resume. You can say, if I were applying, let's say for a administrative assistant position, you could say Lauren Rosenkrantz, administrative assistant. So you want to include either the specific title or you want to have your first, last name and resume, or your first and last name and cover letter. I think those were your 3 questions. Did I hit them? Awesome. Thank you, Lori.
We do get some questions at the library, some, should we, and sometimes I don't know what best practices are now and, what they were a couple of years ago. So anybody else want to jump in with any specifics? Or Lauren said, We covered a lot last week on creating the LinkedIn profile. Has anyone started it and would like us to look at it? Or do you have any questions about what should be included and what shouldn't be included or anything like that? Okay. Okay, well, again, this meeting was recorded and it will be available to you participants and we will be sending it out. It'll just take me a couple hours to do the editing and making it pretty and hosting it on YouTube. I hope everyone got the last one. It is on Norwalk Public Library's YouTube channel, so you are welcome to go and look at the LinkedIn tool building skills there as well. And Lauren, because these people did attend today's, you are willing to look at their resume and cover letter and give them some critiques. Is that still okay?
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Great.
And Lori, after this presentation, I will send you the slides as I did last week as a PDF, and it includes my email address. And then you are welcome to, to send it. And in this case, you don't need to send it as a PDF. If you have it as a Google Doc or a Word doc, I could certainly open either, and I'd be happy to provide feedback. If you have questions, you can include that in the email. I really like to be able to help our job seekers as much as I can.
Okay. Yes, Audrey, I do see that question. On the Norwalk Public Library YouTube channel, if you just go to YouTube and search for us, it is up there already. It's session 1 on LinkedIn, and that does include the entire class that we had here. So yes, you can absolutely access that. If anybody has any problems reaching Lauren, I sent out the link to the Zoom meeting, so you can always bounce back to me and I can connect you that way, whichever is easiest for everybody.
One final note that I do want to mention, we talked a lot about, I think I said throughout tonight's presentation, the importance of customizing your resume and cover letter for the position you're applying for. And I know I mentioned it last week, but it's worth mentioning again. Most college career centers have phenomenal resources available online. So for example, because I teach at UConn, I'm very familiar with their career development center and their career center site and the resources available. So if you Google UConn Career Center resume, they actually have a guide available online. You don't even need to be a UConn student to access it, although of course you can access your college career center for more information as well. But the reason I mention UConn's is because in their career guide, they actually show you how they've taken a job description and they've incorporated the information in that job description into a cover letter and resume. So it's a way for you to be able to see how it was done with a sample that they provide. And again, it's not something where you're going to, sort of do a copy and paste, but it is to give you some real guidance in terms of how you can be successful in incorporating those keywords and skills into your marketing materials. So I wanted to mention that as well. So also, if you know that there's a job you're applying for, you can send me that doc as well. I'd be happy to look at the job description and make some real suggestions on how you can incorporate that information into your cover letter and resume. So I hope that can be helpful to you. I look forward to hearing from you, following up from this session with your resumes and cover letters. And I, of course, wish you all the best in your job search. Next week, we're going to focus on interviewing skills. So get excited for that. I know I am.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Lauren. We really appreciate it. And I hope to hear from everybody. Please reach out. We're here to help.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.